I used to live in a haunted house. Written and submitted by Dagarela. Recently I've been reminiscing on my paranormal experiences, and I thought to share one of them in the spirit of the spooky season. I'm pretty sure that the last house I lived in was haunted, and here's why. Up until last year, I was living in a shared house with my longtime friend. We've known each other since high school, and because of a few fortunate events, we ended up living together in a couple of places. The house we lived in at the time was getting too small for us, and that's how we found our new place that I solemnly believe to this day was haunted. At the beginning of the summer of 2020, we both agreed it was time to search for a new place, somewhere that was more convenient and spacious, and when the time was right, I found a Facebook ad for a beautiful Grade 2 listing building right in the middle of our town center. The place was super spacious, had more room than we could have asked for, tall ceilings, old sash windows with a beautiful view of the town center. I love anything old and antique, so I instantly fell in love with it. When we first went to view it, it was full of light, warmth, and felt super inviting. So we made our decision pretty fast, and after a couple of days back and forth with the landlords, we completed necessary paperwork and started packing. A month later, we were moving. On the day of our move, we noticed one big difference. The place was very dark and cold, nothing like it was the first time we saw it. We were still in the middle of the summer, but inside it's around 6 degrees Celsius, which is just baffling. I've visited many old buildings in my time, but I've never felt cold radiating off the walls like that. There was also a very thick wall between mine and my friend's bedroom, which no matter how hard we knocked on, we couldn't hear each other. It was the end of June, and we both had 2 electric heaters going for most of the day, but to no avail. The heat just wouldn't stay. Our first night was cold and pretty much sleepless because every time I felt myself drifting off, a noise would wake me up and I just couldn't settle. It wasn't anything in particular, more like ordinary house creaking noises we're all very used to, but the frequency of them was just off. It was as if the house wouldn't just let me fall asleep. I didn't question it as much as I should, maybe because I was naturally anxious for my first night in a new place, so didn't expect much sleep anyway. But there is an old saying in the family that the first dream you have in your new house is very important, because it'll tell you if the place is good for you and if you're going to have good fortune living there. Once I finally managed to get some sleep and basically fell into what felt like a mini coma, I remember being chased through the house by a tall, dark shadow figure, and that definitely wasn't a good sign. Throughout our first week, we finally managed to get used to the noises and had a full night of sleep. I didn't remember having any dreams after. It felt like kind of blank, as if I didn't dream at all. But sooner rather than later, new things began happening, and there was always issues with construction of the building. Strange, pungent-smelling leaks would appear out of nowhere, even when we were going through a heat wave, which in part of the UK we lived in, would get very dry. We'd get frequent power cuts, with no other buildings being affected, just us. It was common knowledge among our family and friends that there was always something going on with our building, and it felt like the house just didn't want to be lived in. Contractors would come out to fix the constant leaking roof, but a couple days later it'd come back stronger, without a single drop of rain outside. The landlords were tired and baffled by the constant small disasters we could call them about, and as I'm writing this, they sold the building about 3 months ago. I'm guessing things haven't changed much and they simply just had enough. I remember one particular night when it felt like things reached a completely new level, and it just wasn't about small, confusing repairs. It was about to get very paranormal and very personal. I had just come back home from work and was unpacking some groceries I bought on my way back. The kitchen was never my favorite place in the building, and it always felt uneasy being there alone, especially when I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Our toilet and shower room were separate and had small vestibules with some utilities and storage. The fridge stood right next to the one which led to the shower, so I could always see into it with the corner of my eye. I nearly finished putting things away in the fridge when I caught a glimpse of something, and I instantly froze. For a moment I thought I saw a dark, tall figure just standing there, but when I looked again, it was gone. It looked exactly like the shadow figure from my dream, the only dream that I've had since we moved there. An overwhelming sense of dread crawled up my spine, and I darted out of there as fast as I could. The place looked empty, but I could feel 1,000 eyes watching me from every direction. My love for the paranormal and occult has taught me that this particular feeling is probably the worst sign of an evil entity being present. Apparitions aren't as dangerous, even though they might seem it at first, but a feeling of being watched, as if something's hovering over you with their claws stretched out, just waiting to pull you in, is a very, very bad sign. And it most likely isn't your grandma visiting you from the afterlife. A few days later, I told my friend about what had happened, and she said she had experienced something similar while taking a shower a couple nights back. It's as if the same tall, dark shadow figure hovered in the corner of the shower room, just below the attic flap. She hated that flap since we moved in, and always mentioned that it felt like just off, like something was up there and could come out at any time. For the next few weeks, we'd watch the house closely and tell each other if we'd find anything suspicious. We didn't see the figure again, but an overwhelming sense of dread and fear had started to spread across the whole house, making us question what the hell's going on. Were we really dealing with something supernatural? The building was very old, and probably at least 70, if not 100, and it was possible that it would hold a whole lot of energy from its previous owners. So many different stories and scenarios had played out in these walls, and not a lot of them could be good. Most of them probably weren't. I tried to research about the history of it, but I didn't have much luck except for finding that the building was used as a moot hall, which was a meeting hall for town's residents back in the early days. Things didn't look great. The building would pull tricks on us more often, and one night I watched my ceiling nearly split in half as the plaster cracked all the way across my bedroom. Apparently it wasn't anything dangerous, but it certainly didn't feel like it at the time when I laid in my bed and watched the whole thing happen. Me and my friend both began entertaining the thought of moving somewhere else, even though the original plan was to stay there for a few years. The atmosphere was becoming unbearable, and so we had to make a choice, or rather it was made for us during our last power cut. That was our breaking point. It was around midnight when the lights went off, and we met at the landing with our tiny emergency flashlight we always used to check the fuse box. Most often than not, the fuses were okay, but we always checked anyway because the thought of having to sit in the dark not knowing what's next, it was just way too disturbing, especially at the time. We went down 2 flights of stairs to get the awkwardly fitted fuse box right below our tall ceiling, and began investigating. It is when my friend's shoulder got pulled back, as if someone was trying to grab her. We both screamed and ran back to my bedroom, where we hoped and waited for the power to come back. It was probably the longest 2.5 hours of my life. We didn't wait long before applying for a new house, but every new place we found just wouldn't happen. There was always some different reason, like the paperwork issues or other applicants got ahead of us, etc., etc. But I eventually moved back in with my parents to save up for my own place, because the chances of us getting anything we looked at were more bleak with each week. We didn't want to stay in that house any longer. And that's how I left that house. Sometimes when I visit town center, I walk by the building and feel that same sense of dread from before, as if something or someone's staring down at me, wanting to reach out and pull me back to finish what had started. And time to time, I still get the same dream that I had the first night we moved there, but I always managed to get away. I wonder what the new residents have to deal with, and if they're okay. What do you think is wrong with my house? Written and submitted by Realistic Spray 8045. Before I start my story, I want to make it clear I don't believe in the paranormal. I'm skeptical of anything supernatural. That doesn't stop me from enjoying the stories people tell me about their experiences. My family and I have moved a lot throughout my life, and nothing strange has really happened to me in all the places I've lived. That all changed with our most recent move. To give you some sense of setting, we built our house in the middle of the woods on a mountain that overlooked the valley below us. It's a beautiful sight, and to this day I'll often go up and admire the view. One thing I should mention about my house is there are large windows everywhere. My parents made it this way so that we could enjoy the scenery around us and get some natural light. Although I loved seeing nature, it often made me uneasy whenever night would fall and I could see the pitch black darkness. We didn't have any curtains either, so I couldn't just cover them up. My first story happened a few months after we moved. My parents are out on a date, leaving me and my 3 siblings home alone. It was all going smoothly, and it seemed like an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Later that night, we started to drive to our weekly church activity. My 18-year-old brother stayed behind because he was too old to go to the activities, but 10 minutes into our drive, he called my older sister. One thing about my older brother, he's a no-nonsense guy, and it took a lot to intimidate him, considering he stood 6'3". My sister put the phone on speaker, and my brother proceeded to ask if we had left yet. We all looked at each other, confused, and my older sister responded by saying that we had left a while ago and we were already almost at the church. He paused for a moment before he spoke again, asking if my youngest sister was in the car. Once again, we said, "We're all here." I asked him if there was something wrong. In the calmest voice, my brother proceeded to tell us what had happened, and to this day, I'm surprised at how unbothered he seemed. This is what he told us. My brother's room was one of the biggest rooms in the house, as it was a game room that took up half the upstairs. He was playing a game on his Xbox when he heard the sounds of muffled talking coming from downstairs. My brother was confused, considering he had thought we had already left, but quickly shrugged it off. After a few more seconds, he had the sudden urge to check it out again. He paused his game. The door opened up at the top of the stairs. A wall blocked the view of the kitchen so that he couldn't see into it. He said the voice sounded like a little girl. He assumed it was my youngest sister talking to the dogs. My brother said he couldn't understand what she was saying, as it was too muffled for him to hear, which was strange considering my sister's very loud. He said he called her name, but there wasn't any answer. And the muffled talking continued. Frustrated by the lack of response, he called her name again, much more forcefully, and started making his way downstairs. My brother told us he stopped when he heard the sounds of barefoot steps running across our hardwood floor, and it sounded as if the person had run into my parents' room. But when he rounded the corner, there was no one there. My 2 dogs, a golden retriever and a German shepherd, were looking where my brother, he thought he had heard the footsteps. My brother said he'd looked around the house, found no trace of anyone. He even called our names multiple times. Thought we were pranking him, and that's when he called us. I remember feeling slightly unnerved when he finished, and I asked him if he was just messing with us. And he swore that he wasn't before he hung up, brushing off the experience as if it wasn't a big deal. As I said, I don't believe in the supernatural, and if my brother wasn't messing with us, I was concerned that a person was living in our house. When we got home, my brother told our parents what had happened, and they immediately searched the crawl space. The entrance was in my parents' closet, so it would make sense that someone would run into their room. But there was nothing down there. Soon enough, we just all forgot about it. Over the next year, nothing too big happened except the occasional doors opening and closing by themselves, though I always blamed them on drafts around the house. It was nearing the end of the school year, and summer was about to begin. My two closest friends had saved up enough money to fly to my state and visit me for a couple of weeks, and I was just ecstatic about seeing them again. I had tons of fun showing them the many things that my state has to offer, and I asked if they wanted to spend a night at my house. They both hurriedly agreed, and the day of the sleepover was set. At this time, I shared a room with my youngest sister, so there were two twin-sized beds in my room. I figured they could sleep in the beds, and I could sleep on the carpet. When they came to my house, we joked around and drove the side-by-side around the property. It wasn't long before night approached. We were all sitting in my room and talking about something I can't remember when we heard the tapping. Our conversation quickly stopped, and the other two girls quickly got freaked out. I only laughed as I saw their expressions and quickly joked that it was probably a ghost. They didn't like that, as they both believed in the paranormal. They searched around my room to see where the tapping was even coming from. I helped them look as if I was curious, and I'd never heard this sound before. We discovered that it was coming from the far left corner of my room. By that time, the tapping had stopped. My friends had determined that I was the investigator, and they told me to tap on various objects in the room to see if I could replicate the noise. I hit many things in my room, and none of it sounded like the soft taps from earlier. One of my friends suggested that I tap the wall, and to my surprise, it was an exact match to the sound. They got even more scared at this discovery. I hurriedly tried to comfort them, saying it was probably just a woodpecker. And this was when I was getting a bit skeptical, considering the wall it was coming from was connected to my bathroom, and I knew there was no way a woodpecker would be able to hit it from that side. That's when I realized my younger sister was probably pranking us. Went into the bathroom to investigate. I wasn't surprised when my sister wasn't in there. I figured she had gone downstairs to hide. When I finally found her, she was sitting downstairs in the living room watching a show on her own, petting one of the dogs. I interrogated her about the tapping noises, but she only looked at me strangely, brushed it off. When I asked her about it again, she looked at me in that annoyance and told me to leave her alone. She had better things to do than tap on my wall. At this point, I was getting a bit nervous, but I went back into the bathroom and tried to find anything that would make that tapping. But I found nothing. Went to join my friends in the other room. Then when I went in, my friends were wide-eyed and were huddled together in the farthest corner of my room. I questioned them about what they were doing. They said when I went downstairs they heard the tapping again, but it stopped when I went into the bathroom. I want to clarify that there was no rain, wind, the fan in my room was even turned off. I tried to lighten the mood by saying it was a ghost, but it was trying to communicate with us. I sat on the twin bed, pressed against the wall, and joked, saying that perhaps it was speaking in Morse code. Right after I said that, the tapping started up again, only louder. My friends were afraid, but I was still unbothered, continued to mess around. Finally, after a while, I said, "If there is someone here, tap the wall faster." When the words escaped my mouth, the tapping sped up. We all froze. My friends screamed, rushed downstairs, and I quickly followed them, feeling freaked out. I tried to play it off like it was just a coincidence, but they weren't buying it at this point. A small part of me didn't either. We stayed in my living room for a couple hours until I told everyone that I was going to sleep, ghost or not. First, they didn't want to come back up with me. But I said if the spirit wanted to murder me, it had killed me in my sleep a long time ago. No one wanted to sleep in the bed closest to the wall, so my friends just shared the bed while I slept on the ground. We heard no more tapping, that night, and I quickly fell into a deep sleep. The following morning, my friends told me what they had experienced that night, and to this day, I don't know if I believe them. According to them, my closet door slowly opened sometime in the night. I gotta admit that this has never happened before. My main door always tended to open and close by itself, but my closet door, yeah, it never did. And to this day, I've never seen it happen. Only one of them was awake, but she quickly woke up the other girl. Probably didn't help that my closet was only a few feet ahead of their bed. They said the whole night it would slowly open and close. None of them dared to move the entire night. They even said a shadowed hand appeared in the window, which was when they woke me up. Strange thing is, I don't remember them waking me up, though they said I wasn't much help. They told me when they shook me awake and when they explained to me that everything that they had saw, I only said, don't worry, the demon will eat me first. Go back to sleep. And I passed out. After that, they finished their story. I didn't believe them. I figured they must have been too freaked out from last night and the paranoia got to their heads. After that, we had breakfast and they returned to their apartment. They said that my house was haunted and that they was never going to sleep in there again. I haven't had any problems in my room since, well, other than the occasional feeling that I'm being watched. I turn on my light and fall back asleep when that happens. Other things have happened in the house, ranging from strange noises to the immense feeling that someone's behind you. I honestly wonder if my friends saw something that night or if they were just messing with me. But I want to know what you, the readers, think. Do you believe my house is haunted? I can see into the future. I wish I couldn't. Written and submitted by UnknowedIndividual. I can't remember when it started. I've had this ability for as long as I can remember. It started small. I could see a few seconds into the future. Although these flashes were random, they were occasionally useful. I could avoid dropping a plate or someone opening a door while I was standing in front of it. A lot of the time, though, the flashes weren't really helpful. They just were. I used to try to convince my parents that I had this ability, and that stopped when I was around 5 or 6. They, of course, thought I was just a kid with a large imagination. I realized that my ability wasn't normal, that I was different. I was okay with that. After all, it was pretty cool to be able to see a flash of the future, right? As I grew older, I began to be able to see further. First a minute, then 2, 3, 5. By the time I was 14, the flashes let me see over 10 minutes into the future. Flashes were never long, they were just that. Flashes. You know how sometimes you have a thought, and that thought encapsulates an entire idea? You just have an entire idea in a flash, a single quick thought. These flashes were like that. Around the time I turned 15, I could, on occasion, control when a flash would occur. It didn't always work, but sometimes it did. I started to manipulate this to cheat on tests. If I didn't know the answer to a question, I'd wait until about 5 minutes before the test ended. Then I'd try to look 10 to 15 minutes into the future, having already planned to Google the answer to a question once that point in time arrived. I could, of course, not always control the flashes, but when it did work, it was quite useful. My friends always thought I was weird for Googling the answers to questions after the test was over. I didn't mind, though I could not tell them the reason it did because, well, you understand. Anyway, my control over my ability kept becoming greater. I could control how far to look into the future. There was a limit of it, of course, but I could look far enough. I could almost fully reliably use my ability. Random flashes started to become increasingly rare. When I turned 17, I could look weeks into the future. I didn't really know how I'd be able to make this very useful yet, but I had no doubt I was going to figure it out a couple of ways. You might think it'd be easy to use this ability to your benefit, but there is a problem. No one can change the future. The actions I take will always lead to the future I saw. I found that out when I tried to cheat on a biology test one time, and instead I saw myself in the supermarket with my friends. Then when the test was over, I actually forgot to check the answer and went to the supermarket with my friends. One day, while having breakfast, I had a random flash. I hadn't had a random flash in months. In the flash, I was in my bed, late at night, and there was a pain in my chest, and screaming from my parents' room. I didn't want to believe what I saw, so I went back and looked into the future to the exact moment, and to my horror, it showed the same thing. A person at the foot of my bed plunging a knife into my chest, and my parents screaming. It couldn't be real. For the first time, I couldn't remember I didn't believe a vision of the future. No, that's wrong. I just deluded myself into thinking it wasn't real. Maybe it was seeing a nightmare? Yeah, that's gotta be it. I was just seeing a flash of myself having a nightmare. But I couldn't but delude myself forever. So, a week before the date that it was going to happen, I looked 5 minutes before the incident, 10 minutes before, half an hour before, and it all pointed to one conclusion. This wasn't a nightmare. It was real. Myself and my family were going to get murdered. I had to do something. You might think it'd be easy, just get yourself and your family out of the house, right? I knew it wouldn't be that simple. So, I went on the internet and hired some people to come and, I suppose, protect my house that night. I know it sounds ridiculous, I know, but I wasn't thinking very clearly, and I had to think of something convoluted, something that would elude the future, something that could trick the passing of time to avoid my fate. But now, laying in my bed, the night it's supposed to happen, I'm not so sure anymore. The website I hired these people from was a little shady. I had brushed it off at the time. But then, why was there a strange noise coming from the front door? I really did try to convince myself that it was nothing. However, deep down, I knew that wasn't true. After all, no one can change the future. May God Forgive Me. Submitted by Argument Creepy 9385. I should confess that in order to survive, I had to eat most of my captain's crew. When the madness struck us, some of us were not okay with the idea of cannibalism. I had failed to convince the captain that the only way we could survive the journey was to eat the injured crewmates. I told him they were just protein, but he kept insisting that I had gone mad. So I boiled him and fed him to his men. When they asked me what I had fed them, I felt no need to lie. I just told them it was the captain. The priest was disgusted. He left the kitchen to vomit. That's when God spoke to me. I locked the kitchen door and began smashing the engineer's head with a pan. The hot oil burned his flesh as he screamed in horror. The priest, hearing all the commotion, begged me not to kill him, but I couldn't resist. As the old saying goes, you know, part of the crew, part of the stew. The priest desperately tried to break the lock as I butchered his friend, but by the time he entered, I had already cut the engineer's head off. Terror-stricken by what I had done, he fled from me, though I made slurping sounds as I chased him off the ship. He asked me, "Why are you doing this?" I mocked him by imitating his voice. It angered me that he wouldn't let me consume him. Sure, we had enough meat for the stew now, but why not make more stew? Priest just didn't want to understand. It was truly unfortunate that he escaped. Thank you for being a part of this living nightmare. We hope to disturb you again soon.